everybody. Welcome back to this episode of on script writing. We are going to continue with scripting for news and current affairs. In the previous episode, we were concentrating on the language of scripting for news and current affairs. In this episode, we are going to talk more about writing to pictures. Now, TV news is about getting the right picture, gathering the right kind of picture. Now, I give you two examples of news. The first example is 60 people massacred, and the other news is 2 auto rickshaw drivers killed and 50 bus passengers injured in a bridge collapse in Delhi. Now, out of these two, which news do you think is more important?
The first one.
The first one is more important. Why?
Because 60 people have massacred, which is
massacred means there are greater implications.
Yeah.
The second one is about an accident. So there is nobody's. There is no
fault
anything like that. And but here a group of people have been killed by another group of people due to some differences in ideology or whatever. So which makes the implications more severe. Okay, so definitely the first news is more important. But it may happen that the news agency doesn't have proper pictures of this massacre there. There is just a news flash. Whereas here, since the accident has taken place in Delhi, the bridge collapse, so there are enough pictures of that. So then the news agency may decide that when they are packaging the bulletin, that they will lead their bulletin with this news of the bridge collapse. And then later on they may give the other as a small news flash. Okay, so even though the importance of the earlier news is more, because of lack of pictures, its importance becomes less in the packaging of the news bulletin. So the thing to remember is that the standard principle is that pictures before words. So when you are talking about television news, it's pictures before words. Okay. So having said this, now let's concentrate on the visual flow of one news capsule. Say every news capsule begins with the studio anchor giving the lead. He says the lead. All right. Then it's taken over by the field anchor who gives the follow-up. All right. So it begins with a visual of the news, and appropriate, a very telling, very gripping visual, accompanied with the voiceover of the field anchor. Okay. Then there may be a soundbite of a relevant person, a knowledgeable person who can throw some light, give some opinion on what is going on. All right. After the soundbite, again there may be a visual with the field anchor's voiceover. Then there may be another soundbite to counter the earlier soundbite. Particularly the earlier soundbite is very opinionated. Then to strike a balance, you will need another soundbite which will counter the earlier soundbite. Okay, and then after that the field anchor may do summing up with a piece to camera, meaning that the field anchor will stand in front of the camera in that location and do his or her own summing up of the thing. Then we again go back to the studio anchor. Okay, so this is how the visual flow is for a typical news capsule. Okay. Now, the field anchor, who is also the local correspondent, normally what they do is they do the news, they package the news. That means they take the shots, they give piece to the camera, they take the interviews, then they come back to their studio, they do the edit, record their voiceover, everything. They package the whole thing and they beam it via satellite to the headquarters. So from say Chennai to Delhi or Kolkata to Delhi, so they beam it to the headquarters. So headquarters gets these news capsules from all over the country, and then the news editor arranges them in a certain hierarchical order depending on the hardness of the news and so on. Then the studio anchor records the leads for every news capsule, records the leads, records the headlines to break the news to the headlines as a summing up the headlines once again, like that, and the whole news bulletin is packaged and it goes for broadcasting. Okay, but nowadays there are 24-hour news channels. There are so many 24-hour news channels. Now with a 24-hour news channel, there is no time to do this packaging and send it. Okay, supposing there is a daily news, say the news will come every day at 9 p.m. Then throughout the day they can gather the news, beam it back, and then by evening the whole thing will be packaged and broadcast. But if constantly news has to be delivered, then where is the time for the field anchors to edit everything, add their voiceovers, and then beam it? Okay, the field anchors won't have any time to package their parts of the news. Okay, so then what they do is the studio anchor directly gets in touch with the field anchor to get the update. Sometimes the two-way video connection also may not be there. So we only hear the field anchor's voice. There is a still of the field anchor or a still of that particular location, and we hear the field anchor's voice, and the studio anchor keeps asking questions. Then there may be the studio anchor may decide to interview somebody else, so he may call up some other person who is an expert on the subject and get that person's opinion. If supposing for a particular piece of news, immediately a visual is not available, then what are the other substitutes? Now the other substitute, the most important substitute is graphics. So graphics you see in many types of news. You can see maps in, say, supposing there is a disaster, tsunami, where all tsunami has hit. So immediately with a map of India it will be pointed out. Okay, you see graphics. In weather news you are seeing graphics all the time. Similar thing you might remember when there was this Kandahar hijack, and the whole thing, entire aircraft were inside, and with the graphics that this is how the hijackers were standing, and they said everything was okay. So we have either still graphics or animated graphics there. For budget news, we always have these pie charts and bar charts and all these things to support all the statistics. Okay, so graphics is another substitute for visuals. When live visuals are not available, then you take resort to graphics. Okay, sometimes you may have to draw from library shots, that means stock shots. So you have graphics, you have library shots, and very rarely you have reconstructions, very rarely. Now I remember there was one news item about the taxi drivers of Calcutta, that how they are expressing, it was the taxi union had called a strike, and why? Because their lives were being threatened. That means the taxi drivers who were plying late night taxis, they were not feeling safe. All kinds of people were boarding their taxis, and then they were asking them to go to various places at gunpoint and so on. So they were not feeling safe. So the whole thing was reconstructed. But it came immediately as the news started, it came there reconstruction. So reconstruction is another option, but it should be used very, very sparingly. You should not use too much of reconstruction. Okay, so these are some options, some other options if you don't have proper visual of that incident. Okay, and during a news broadcast, the television screen takes the form of a mosaic. I mean, there are so many things at a time. There is the studio anchor there. In a split screen, you may see the field anchor, or you may see a still photograph of somebody and hearing his voice. Okay, then the logo of the channel will be there. Then below, date time will be there. Below, two lines of scroll. Other current news as well as shares. Okay, sometimes one line in English, one line in Hindi, same thing. Okay, so constantly they are scrolling. We are getting more and more used to assimilating so much information quickly at a glance. Okay, so this is how in broadcast news you play with the visuals, and visuals are of prime importance. Okay, now when you are packaging a news bulletin, I just told you that the various inputs that you get from the field correspondents, you package them according to in a certain hierarchical order, giving prime importance to hard news. Now, what is hard news? Anybody knows what is
the important news, hard news,
Yeah,
hard-hitting news that captures the headline.
There are two ways of defining hard news. One is something, an event that has never occurred before. You know, once in a time event. For example, this 9/11, okay, or tsunami. Okay, this sort a disaster of this magnitude and of this nature
Has never occurred
has
before.
not occurred before. So that news is as hard as it can be. So the newer the news is, the harder it is. Acha. Second thing is a news that affects a lot of people. Say political news or news on business, on the budget. Political news or
Shares
economic
coming down,
news is affecting everybody. The news on budget, what the finance minister has announced, will be affecting everybody's life. So it is going to be hard news. Okay, so these are two yardsticks. How new is the event, the occurrence, and second thing, how many people are affected. Okay, so hard news is always given priority. The news bulletin begins with hard news. But sometimes there may be a spot news. What is a spot news? Suddenly something has flashed, something has occurred, like say it may be an assassination, it may be a military coup, or it may be a disaster. Okay, suddenly out of the blue. So that becomes a spot news. And spot news is almost always a hard news. So you have hard news and you have spot news. Spot news is something that has suddenly erupted, suddenly come up. And you always begin your news bulletin with a spot news and then go over to the other hard news. If there is no spot news, then one has to decide which is the hardest news and begin the news bulletin with that. Okay. Now a complicated hard news can have sidebars and backgrounders. So what are the sidebars and backgrounders? A little piece of news capsule which which explains the dynamics of a particular event is called a backgrounder. That is a news in itself, and that also is incorporated so that people understand that why a certain event has happened. So that's called a backgrounder. And a news that is an offshoot of the main news is called a sidebar. Okay, so for example, this tsunami. So the tsunami disaster, the magnitude of the disaster and all those things is the main news. But tsunami, a news like tsunami can have several sidebars. So one sidebar is that suddenly so many orphans, their parents are lost, missing or dead, and they are left orphaned. Okay, that is a news which is a sidebar of the main tsunami news. Okay, so a hard news can have sidebars and backgrounders. Okay. Achha, then comes the concept of soft news. Now, soft news is usually cultural news or human interest news are considered to be soft news. Like Gunter Grass visiting Kolkata will be soft news. No, it will be newsworthy even in a national news channel because Gunter Grass is a Nobel laureate, and last time when he came to Kolkata, there was a lot of furor over it, there was a lot of controversy, so he has come to Kolkata again. So therefore, definitely there is news value of this, but it's a soft news because after all it doesn't affect people's lives directly. Okay. Similarly, film stars celebrating Holi is soft news. Youngsters celebrating Valentine's Day is soft news. Okay, so all these are soft news, and a news bulletin usually is concluded with a soft news, a human interest story, so that it leaves a kind of good feeling in the viewers. Okay, nice impact with it. So this is the structure of a news bulletin. Okay, so before we go further, let's have a recap.
Okay. As you have told that picture should be before words. Okay. And
ma'am, you mentioned that elements that go to form a news capsule, the important things that we should keep in mind is the studio anchor, the field anchor, the pictures, that are the visuals and all, and then the graphics, and then a piece to camera, that is the field anchor where she's standing with the background of that particular place where she's reporting from. Even that is very important.
You even said that if fresh footage is not available, we use different mediums, which are like the library shots, which are old shots, then the graphics, then there are stills, and then there's very rarely we use reconstructions also.
Okay.
And we were also talking about the sequence of news capsules when if we have a spot news, which is like something suddenly popping up, we would give it the priority. Or otherwise, if there's nothing of that sort, we do a measure up, and then the hardest news possible is given the priority, and then it's followed up by the soft news, which are cultural news and human interest news.
Welcome back. We will continue with where we had left off. So now let us turn our attention to writing voiceovers for pictures. the last thing in news scripting, the last thing that you should do is prepare a detailed voiceover and then look for the appropriate picture. You should not take that strategy. So your priority should be to get the right picture. So if you are the field anchor, you have to immediately go to the scene of the action with the cameraman and try to capture gripping visuals. Okay, so try to get as many good visuals as possible and select from them which is the appropriate opening visual, because opening visual should be gripping. It should hook the audience to the news, and from that it should of course be supported by an appropriate voiceover, and then from there on you go to the heart of the story. Okay. Now, a news cameraman won't have time to take nice pictures, well-framed, well-lit pictures, but he should have the alertness, the agility to capture the moment. So he should he should have his eyes open, he and the reporter together, that what is going on, something interesting, something of human interest, something unusual going on, and take the camera there. It may often happen that if you go to a scene of an important event, there are a lot of news channels or a lot of cameramen, and they are all jostling for the same visual. So instead of being one in the crowd, why don't you look around and look for some other option, which will give uniqueness to your
story,
visual, to your channel also. Okay, instead of all the channels getting the same visual or similar visual, you try to be different. Okay, so don't go where everybody else is crowding. Go to another spot in the location and try to get an unusual visual.
Be unique.
Yeah, so try to be unique. Okay, so now suppose you have gone to cover the tsunami disaster somewhere down south or maybe to Andaman. Okay, and your visual is your opening visual is you have managed to get a very intimate picture of a social worker rescuing a baby, a little baby, and you decide that it will be your opening visual. Okay, so now we have to devise a commentary that will go with it. Needless to say, the commentary should not describe the visual. In the visual, it is
Then
very
it's
apparent
nothing,
that the social worker is not the mother. But your commentary should give some value addition to the visual, a new angle to the visual, okay, enrich the visual. So, what could your commentary be?
Might be, ma'am, we can talk about where exactly the baby was found, in what circumstances.
Okay.
So, a
The
little bit
special
more.
points.
What was
Yeah.
so different? That why was she the only one who
What
was
are the
left?
possibilities
Or
of
maybe-
survival?
Okay.
Maybe in a very generalized way, we could talk about several other orphans in similar state.
No, that you go
You
a
can
little
later,
later.
little
Go- In
later.
the next sentence, you can go to
Okay.
that. Okay, do the generalization. Now you talk about the specific thing. So your idea is good that you can talk about under what circumstances the baby
was found.
was found, and then go to how many such babies may be there. Okay, crying out for help, or supposing that will be say one of the first stories on tsunami. But supposing this story is say after 3 or 4 days. Okay, naturally tsunami stories will continue over days, maybe
yeah.
over weeks. So supposing your story is after 3 or 4 days of the disaster, then you may decide to strike a positive, optimistic note in your story. Okay, so you want to begin with an optimistic note. So then you can write something like this, that a helping hand is a welcome thing to the victims to put the tragedy behind them, something like that. Or the social workers are not shying away from the daunting task of putting the lives of the tsunami survivors back on the rails. Okay, that life is slowly coming back to normal, just giving this signal. So you begin with that, and then you show the general shots, long shots, where more such victims are seen, and over the long shots, you can now give the statistics, the magnitude of the disaster and how much help is still required, and all these details. Okay, so you start with a specific thing, and then you go over to the general picture. Okay, then the next thing you can do is take the social worker's sound bite. So sound bite is an interview. It's a very short interview. It is called a sound bite. Okay, so why it is called a sound bite? As if you are taking a bite out of the interview. So while shooting, you may take a longish interview, but out of that, you will just pick up one
Select,
telling sentence. as if you'll bite into the interview and pick out one telling sentence. Okay. Now you will be lucky if you get an articulate social worker who will be able to speak concisely. Okay, so that you can pick up one sentence from it. Otherwise, you will have to prod the person by asking him questions or suggesting him that you may say this, you may say this in a shorter way, and so on, till you get exactly what you are looking for. Then you carry on with your visuals. Your earlier commentary should smoothly lead into the soundbite. Now you should write the commentary in such a way that the soundbite will be a natural consequence of the commentary. Okay, maybe at the end of the commentary you ask a question and the social worker kind of answers the question. Okay, something like that. Another soundbite to counter the social worker's allegation perhaps. So this time maybe from a government official. So you manage to get another soundbite. And then finally, you stand in front of the camera and do a piece to camera. Now, you have to do a lot of quick thinking. Because you have got the visuals, you have to quickly mentally edit out some visuals and decide which visuals you will take and in which order and roughly what will be the commentary going with you. Even though you haven't worded the commentary exactly, roughly you know. So you have already in your mind figured out the logical flow of your story so that your piece to camera will be a summing up. Okay, so you take a little while, you write down that piece to camera properly, and then stand in front of in the good location where in the background the activities can be seen, and you give your piece to camera. Okay, so in this piece to camera, you may give the lead out, which by summing up the whole story, or after the piece to camera, there is a cut to the studio anchor, and the studio anchor gives the lead out, which is also sometimes called the tagline. Okay. But now the point is that what is the importance of this piece to camera? Why is it important to incorporate a piece to camera in a news capsule?
Basically helps create a visual in the mind of the audience. Like we, when the reporter is talking or the person on screen is talking, we might have a very different picture of what is actually taking place. So if we have a piece to camera, at least we have little bit of idea that okay, this is something like that.
Guiding the interpretation.
Yeah, basically guiding our imagination.
Okay, that means it is guiding your interpretation, as you said. Also, the piece to camera gives authenticity to the entire news. That I have actually gone there and seen. Okay,
it's like a proof.
Yeah, it's like a proof that I am actually bringing the actual thing to you. So it authenticates the news capsule. Okay, so that's why piece to camera should be incorporated. Now, in this connection, I would like to give you an anecdote, even though it's a little bit of digression. Now, a senior news correspondent in Kolkata, she was covering riots. This was many years back, 8-9 years back, for a national news channel. Okay, so she took the shots of the disturbance, got the sound bites, etc. And then she did her piece to camera. And it so happened that while she was doing the piece to camera, in the background there was some fight and there was a bomb exploding. It almost took her life. And she even had a start while giving the piece to camera. She even as if jumped out of her skin. And all that was happening in the background. So she kept all that. She packaged it with the entire piece to camera. She edited her news capsule and beamed it to Delhi. When finally the news was broadcast, none of it was there. Okay, none of this. Her voice was there, but her piece to camera, about which she was very proud eventually, was just not present there. Okay, it was edited out by the channel, by the news editor. Okay, and the reason is that a riot on the religious grounds is a very sensitive thing in India. So one riot should not incite other riots in the country. So if there is a violence is shown on screen, then that might incite riots at other places. So that's why violence on screen is usually avoided. Then, when speaking about the language of the scripting the news story, try to avoid cliches. Okay, what happens is certain phrases, certain sentences are repeated so many times that by overuse they become cliches. Okay, say for example, the security was tightened, a massive manhunt has begun. Okay, this you will hear on every news channel. Okay? Acha, but when you are scripting, you try to word it differently. Use a fresh language. This is a very general thing. Instead of that, you can always be more specific of the situation. Okay? So, like that. So, you try to avoid these cliches. Acha, then the last piece of advice is when you are scripting, leave some breathing space for yourself. Your commentary doesn't have to be with every single visual, and the soundtrack doesn't have to be saturated with the commentary. So there can be some breathing space where ambient sound can take over. And this becomes easier if the news is about a rally, a morcha, or a mela, where there is a big gathering, people are cheering, people are clapping. Okay, so it can be easier to let the ambient sound flow for a while. Again, you can pick up the commentary. Okay, so you leave some breathing space for yourself. Okay, so these are some of the basic things to be remembered in for news and current affairs. So shall we have a conclusion before we call it a day? A
Ma'am,
recap.
yeah, like you said, the first point that we should keep in mind is getting the right picture. That is, when you watch it, it should be, gripping enough, and plus it should be exclusive. And second is that writing the voiceover. The voiceover that you said should be such that it should not repeat what is already there. It should show talk about something that is different from the visual, the hidden
Connected
meaning.
to the
Connected
visual,
to the visual, but not what we can already watch
See
it
in
on
the
the
video.
television
Yeah.
screen.
Yeah, and the sound bite should be crisp, compact, colorful.
And ma'am, we were talking about the piece 2 camera, so it's impact. It's like it authenticates the news capsule, and it also guides the interpretation of the audience or the viewer.
Ma'am, we should also try to avoid the cliches and also keep some breathing space while the news is being read, so that we can try and consume what is going on, and there should be
Sound.
proper spaces between
And
the
the
lines.
news reader will also get
Yeah,
some
sometimes
space.
space.
Right. Okay, so that was a good conclusion, a good summing up. Now that brings us to an end of this series of 20 lectures on script writing. I do hope that you have learned something, and I will leave you with the hope that I will see some scintillating work on screen very soon. Now, when do you know that you have written a good script? When the first person you read it out to can not only visualize the whole film, but you see him smiling and crying at the right moments. Then you know that your script is a success.